dear believers, when men pursue evil, it is evil that they will find. The devil goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We are not to enter the thicket in search of the lion. We may pay dear.
GREYLOCK is an analogue horror web series created by Rob Gavagan. It has 8 episodes, the first being released on the 13th of March 2023, and as of recording, the most recent video, tape 8, released on the 27th of June 2023. Quick note, if you're wondering why the series is called GREYLOCK, so was I for like the first 7 tapes. Turns out that Mount Greylock is a real place in Massachusetts, and the kind of local area is where all of the series takes place. This series is great, and I've had a lot of fun trying to figure it out, so let's get right into it. The first tape begins with a computer system booting up, showing the camera feed of what appears to be some kind of empty office space. At some point in the past, the computer was turned off via an emergency shutdown, suggesting some sort of incident has occurred. It is revealed that the company this office belongs to is called Simiodyne USA. When the user tries to enter their credentials to access the computer, they're told that the credentials aren't recognised. You can hear the user say something, which overrides the credential requirement. When asked what they would like to do, they again say something unrecognisable.
Welcome back, unknown user ID. What would you like to do?
The phrases sounded kind of like they were reversed, so I tried running them backwards in an audio program, but I still couldn't understand any of them. The user begins to download something off the computer, but the computer continuously errors, and when the download is finished, the computer says that the data has been extracted to. That's the end of tape 1. It's unclear at this point what's happening, so I'll save any theorising until we have more information. The second tape begins with somebody driving a car, listening to a sermon over the radio. I'll highlight some of the sentences the pastor says, as it seems like it might be foreshadowing for what happens later.
When men pursue evil, it is evil that they will find. Mark my words, there is no good that can come from the pursuit of darkness. Our adversary, the devil, goes about like a roaring lion.
And most importantly,
we are not to enter the thicket in search of the lion. We may pay dear.
We'll talk about the importance of these quotes later when we have more information. The cameraman eventually leaves the car and proceeds on foot, taking video of bloody trails left on the ground. A heavily distorted voice, appearing to be from a news report, speaks over this. I will subtitle what I can, but I wasn't able to understand all of it. We can get the general gist of what he was saying. 2 men hiking on Mount Greylock found a human body so mangled they initially thought it was an animal, before realising its skull was human. It's possible our cameraman is investigating this story. He seemed very interested in this tree, spending a lot of time looking at it. There's a strange object sticking out of it, but I, and anyone I've showed this video to, have no idea what it is. If I had to guess, this is probably the site of a murder being described, but what the object is, and what this has to do with the story, I have no idea. The cameraman returns to his car, but seems incredibly paranoid, driving slowly and flashing his lights repeatedly. The first thing the pastor says is that
when we will come face to face with the devil himself, whether we intended to or not, dear believer.
Which does not bode well for our guy here. The pastor says something interesting now.
There is a shadow, misted deep deep within our hearts, within our minds, in a place most people don't even know exists within themselves.
Keep this in mind, this is foreshadowing something we're going to see in the next tape.
And though you may tremble before the beast, you should make it easier on yourself and accept what it is that he bestows upon you.
This is another massive clue for something we haven't seen yet. I'll come back to this later when I talk about my overall theory for what's happening here, but on rewatch, this was one of the most important lines in the entire video for me. Immediately after that last line, something beats on the car. As the driver floors it, the pastor, now distorted greatly, says, and cut to black. That's the end of tape 2. Not a lot happened plot-wise, still, but believe me when I say every single word of the pastor was important in some way or another to unravelling this mystery. I know you're thirsting for a thread of information or answers, and we're going to start to get some in the next tape. Tape 3 takes the form of an army training tape, intended for someone called Alexander Michael Marsh. We can see at the bottom of this page that this tape was created in 1993, which, spoilers, is 6 years after the rest of the series takes place. The tape is produced by a group called Unit 13, which is part of the US Army and Project Stargate. Project Stargate is actually a real project intended to research remote viewing, essentially telepathy, as a means of spying on other countries. It is worth noting that Semiodyne, the company from tape 1, had some hand in Unit 13's research. The tape explains that Unit 13 is focused on studying the use of thought forms for the overall goal of Project Stargate. Thought forms, also known as tulpas, are also a concept believed by people in the real world, which is a physical manifestation of a person's will, a sort of physical extension of a person's mind into the world. Thought forms usually require immense mental training to summon. However, a person in a lot of emotional distress can also inadvertently summon one. Without training, the summoned thought form is unpredictable in nature. This is believed in universe to be the origin of ghosts, as grieving family members accidentally summon thought forms of the deceased. To begin with, thought forms are barely tangible, acting as conventional ghosts, but as more mental focus is applied to creating them, they get closer to real, until they are indistinguishable from the real thing, and some can even sustain themselves without continued input from their creator. In the world of GREYLOCK, Unit 13 are purportedly trying to utilise thought forms to serve as familiars or companions, to benefit American society and keep American citizens safe. With our context of what Project Stargate is, we can immediately cast doubts on this claim, but we'll see even more later why this might not be true. Next, we are introduced to Dr. Bernard Hayes, who was hired to oversee operations related to Unit 13's work. Between Unit 13, Dr. Hayes, and Semiodyne USA, a machine was created called the Thought Form Manifester. It is, as stated in the tape, able to
create truly independent and self-sustaining thought form entities from the minds of select, willing participants.
Quickly now, remember this quote from tape 2 I told you to remember?
There is a shadow nested deep, deep within our hearts, within our minds, in a place most people don't even know exists within themselves.
Now listen to what the tape says next.
Being that they come from the deepest recesses of the human mind.
These thought forms, especially those from the Thought Form Manifester, are not good news, and we're going to see more evidence of this soon. The tape then shows us some configurations that the thought forms can take.
They could look like a person, an object, an animal, or even something as abstract as the physical representation of an emotion.
Keep in mind here, these thought forms are not in any kind of facility, they are out in the wild, which casts doubt on the claim soon to be made that the thought forms are easily contained by Unit 13.
Before touring the thought form chambers, as thought forms can also take on appearances that could be considered disturbing, like a creature one might see in a childhood nightmare. There's no reason to be afraid, however. All thought forms are docile by nature, and while they may look or behave in a frightening manner, and though they are capable of making physical contact, they pose no threat to humans.
The distortion here suggests that this may not be true, either unknowingly or a purposeful lie by Unit 13. The distortions throughout the tapes seem to indicate lies, likely being tampered with by an outside force, which is basically confirmed a bit later on.
Once your session in the thought form manifester is completed, your thought form will be securely transported directly into a containment chamber. Thought forms are unable to pass through the barrier of the and will not be capable of causing you any issues.
Massive distortion here again suggests what I said earlier about thought forms not being as easy to contain as Unit 13 claims. Unit 13 now lists side effects of using the thought form manifester. It seems to suggest that the creation of the thought form from the user's mind is in a way harmful to the user, though that might be me thinking too much into it. Again, when tape claims that the reports of side effects were very mild, the tape is distorted. This may not be true.
None of these side effects should cause you any harm or overt stress, and former testing candidates who have experienced these side effects reported that they were very mild and merely a transient inconvenience.
Overall, this tape has answered a few questions, but also raised a few. We know what kind of thing we're dealing with, but we know very little of what they're truly capable of. Who is Alex Marsh? Who is Dr. Hayes? What is the goal of Unit 13? Some of these questions will be answered. Tape 4 opens somewhat creepily with a zoomed-in shot of a house from the outside at night. Its occupant is seen moving around, turning off lights and closing doors. It seems they're going to bed. Our cameraman then approaches the house, shining his light in windows and checking them for potential entrance points. He's trying to get in. He finds what he wants eventually and puts down his camera, opening a downstairs window in the house. We now see the cameraman walking through the house until stopping at the bottom of some stairs before the camera cuts to black. We begin to hear the struggle. Assumedly, the cameraman is attacking the homeowner. At first it sounds normal as a vicious attack in a home can sound, but if you listen closely, you can hear animalistic noises. It appears our cameraman is a little less man than we thought. The footage then cuts to the cameraman walking away from the property, casually, before looking up at the moon. The footage cuts abruptly again to Max Headroom. His speech is cut short by an emergency alert, which warns of a group of home invaders targeting residences in the towns of North Adams, Cheshire, Savoy, and Windsor, all of which are real towns near the base of Mount GREYLOCK. The alert urges residents to lock their doors and windows, close blinds, and arm themselves. Footage cuts to someone on a camcorder watching the emergency alert, where they proceed to immediately ignore the alert and open their window, leaning out of it. In the distance, dozens of screams can be heard, not all of them sounding entirely human, to be honest, but I'm not sure what that would suggest. The cameraman goes to close the window, but a gloved hand shoots up from underneath the windowsill, holding it open. The assailant looks quite heavily dressed, like someone just straight out of a mine or something like that. In the last moments of static, what looks like a skinless face can be seen, peering out of the snowy white disturbance. And the tape ends there. I have a pretty good idea of what's happening here, but to understand we need context from a later tape, so we should move right on. The next tape opens with a grey, staticky image, and the audio of two women talking. One is Tiffany, a pregnant woman coming to have a checkup on an unborn baby, and the other is Rhonda, the ultrasound technician doing the checkup. They make small talk, talking about how Tiffany's husband couldn't get the time off work to come with. Then, the image changes, and it's revealed that the grey static was actually the screen of an ultrasound machine. Upon Rhonda saying, "Let's get some measurements," the baby begins to convulse before disappearing completely. During the static, this newspaper clipping is shown about the home invasions from the previous tape, and then this face. We're going to see this face again. With the baby gone, Both are shocked, but Rhonda chalks it up to a broken ultrasound machine and goes to find another one for them to use. In the meantime, Tiffany begins to break down as Rhonda argues with someone outside. The footage then cuts to a slow zoom on a newspaper clipping showing what appears to be an obituary for Tiffany. It appears that Tiffany, aged 29, has died soon after the events of this tape, having suffered terribly with the loss of her unborn son. The tape ends. Wow. I think I have a pretty good idea of what happened here. In tape 3, it was said that strong emotional states can bring about thought forms unintentionally, so it's my belief that Tiffany, heartbroken from maybe a prior inability to have children, inadvertently produced a thought form baby to cope, believing it to be a real one. Why the thought form baby disappeared at that moment, we're going to go over at the end once we have more information. Before we even begin this next tape, we should probably talk about its title. All the tapes have had titles, however, this is the first one I've felt was important enough to mention. It's called Sleeping Dogs, an allusion to the phrase, "let sleeping dogs lie," meaning to allow a problem to persist, because trying to solve the problem would cause an even bigger problem. This is a continuation of a theme from tape 2, where the pastor warned, "We are not to enter the thicket in search of the lion, we may pay dearly." The tape begins with Dr. Hayes, the psychologist hired by Unit 13 in tape 3, talking at the Symposium of Jungian Psychology and Manifestation of Consciousness, essentially meaning a conference about finding an analytical or systematic approach to manifesting consciousness, referring likely to thought forms. Hayes posits that all of human history has been a fight to search for a god and look him in the eyes as an equal. When Hayes says, as an equal, his voice becomes distorted and demonic on the recording, suggesting that our tape tamperer is upset by this suggestion.
And there, on his apex of infinite knowledge and power, you will approach and look him in the eye. As an equal.
The applause after this statement is distorted in a way to sound like screams. The footage cuts to someone logging onto a computer. The loading screen shows that it is a Simiodyne computer made for the US Department of Defense. The computer welcomes us back as Frank Porter. However, considering that the user bypasses the credential requirement, we can safely say we are not viewing this from Frank Porter's perspective. We are welcomed by the computer to Project Director Frank Porter's message client. The user filters for messages from Paul Morelli of Morelli Construction and Mining Company, who is working on the construction of a redacted facility. From March 24th, 1987 to March 30th, 1987, Paul sent Frank 9 messages, the contents of which comprise most of this tape. The first message is Paul alerting Frank to an issue on the construction site. Whilst digging into Mount GREYLOCK, the crew found tunnels leading deep into the earth. Interestingly, Frank had previously told Paul to call him if anything strange came up, almost suggesting he expected them to find something. Paul says that some things in the cave were obviously man-made, like carvings, but that the tunnels had caved in so far down, so they couldn't explore any further. The next morning, Paul sends another message that some of his crew had gotten sick, so the day would be slower than usual. When saying the words stomach bug, the tape distorts, so we can pretty safely say this is a bit more than a regular illness. Paul also reveals that the caved-in tunnel section, despite no orders being given, had been cleared out and wired up with lights. To add more to this unsettling situation, some of the workers had reported seeing something in the woods at night, like a really tall man. Later that day, Paul sends another message. Frank had sent someone down to get photos of the tunnels, but when he returned, he was very sick and had to be basically carried back to his car. Paul says that some of the artefacts in the tunnel were incredibly old, and a worker on his crew named Arnold Rivers had a history in archaeology, so he was going to head down and see what was there. The next day, Paul sends a message, seemingly very shaken up. He says the crew is getting more sick, and Paul had seen the tall man in the woods.
I swear it had a face.
Another day after that, Paul calls to inform that all the food at the site was rotten, seemingly paranormally, since there was nothing wrong with the storage. 4 hours later, another message about the creature in the woods. The entire time he talks about the creature, the screen flutters and distorts, which might suggest that it is the creature, or something aligned with it, tampering with the tapes. Paul says he's going to have hunting cameras put up to try and capture footage of the creature.
I was gonna put up those fancy hunting cameras and see if we can catch anything.
At 12:39 AM the next day, one of the cameras, camera 3, detects motion and begins to record, although as far as I can see, nothing is captured. The next message is just hunting camera footage, showing camera 2 at noon the same day. Nothing can be seen until a sort of ghostly shine sweeps across the camera. The day after, Paul calls Frank and sounds extremely scared and anxious. A lot of the crew at the site is sick, some now unresponsive. When Paul tried ringing their emergency contacts, the phone just rang forever, no response and no answer machine. The only person they can contact is Frank, but it appears that he's ignoring the messages. Paul begins to laugh maniacally and explains that he too is ill. I'll let him explain what it feels like.
My skin, it feels tight, a lot of pressure behind my eyes, my teeth feel like they're humming, vibrating.
Paul explains he feels compelled to enter the tunnel and that he's going down tonight. He then begins to make animalistic noises. The footage cuts to hunting camera 2, where it is revealed that the weird ghostly light was actually from a translucent creature, seemingly pressing its head against the camera, which then slowly pulls away. The final message begins as just static, slowly fading into the horrifically disfigured Paul, presumably due to the illness that's been plaguing his staff. Finally, hunting camera 2 detects motion for a final time, and we find ourselves looking into a familiar pair of dark eyes. Then the tape ends. Some things we've seen previously might start to be coming together in your head now, but I promise you, it only gets more crazy from here on out, so we'll keep on moving on and save the theorising for the end. In tape 7, we are watching a news anchor called Don Wright reporting on the home invasions from tape 4. He reveals that it has been 2 weeks since the incident, and authorities have identified the perpetrators as an anti-American militia group. I believe, for reasons I'll detail later, that this is a lie. When the news anchor says they are safe, once again, it's distorted.
To assure the public that they are safe once again.
Don Wright then says,
Life has been able to return back to normal, back to normal, back to normal, to normal, to normal, to normal.
Before the show freezes and cuts to a video of conjoined twins crying.
Back to normal for residents of Berkshire County.
2 newspaper clippings pop up here. First of Alex Marsh and Tiffany Crisaldi sat together talking about the baffling loss of their unborn son. We've met both of these before. Alex Marsh was the recipient of tape 3, and Tiffany was the woman from tape 5 who lost her son. Notice her age, however, 26, whereas she was 29 at the time of tape 5's recording. We're going to get back to that. The next newspaper clipping is of an interview with Jim Melgren, a former police officer who is now a private investigator. He talks about a disease going around which is deforming people, making them grow extra limbs, teeth, and develop health conditions ever seen before. This sounds quite similar to the disease Paul had, doesn't it? Yeah, got you. I won't dwell on all this too much, since our next tape is the last one, and once we're through that, we can start to piece everything we have so far together. We begin immediately after the end of tape 7, still seeing Don Wright's disfigured face. The news station, understandably, cuts to a technical difficulties screen. We are then brought to an audio recording of a meeting between the channel's executive and the producers of the Don Wright show. The CIA is investigating the channel about the broadcast hijacking, so the executive has come to ask the producers what happened and how, in not so nice terms.
What the fuck happened?
One of the producers says that the signal was hijacked before it even reached the transmitter, meaning one of two things. Either someone at the channel is in on it, or it was tampered with by paranormal means. It is revealed that Don Wright is unreachable, to which the executive asks one of the producers to go to his house and bring him into the studio.
There's some real powerful people depending on us right now.
The footage then cuts. When our POV character tries to open the next file, they are told it does not exist. However, they do some finagling and manage to get the computer to open it. The file contains a spoken log from Arnold Rivers, who you might remember as the archaeologist from tape 6. The log was made over a week after the events at the mine, which we will soon learn is called the GREYLOCK Morelli incident, and by that name I will reference it from now on. Arnold believes his life is in danger, so he's leaving a record of his finding in the tunnels. According to Arnold, on March 25th, Paul cleared the tunnels and asked Arnold to explore them. It's worth noting that in tape 6, Paul had no idea who cleared the tunnels, and yet here is Arnold saying that Paul had something to do with it. Arnold says that what was discovered at the mountain was not normal. There were the sorts of artefacts one would expect, like those from Native Americans or Mesoamerican, but also Clovis artefacts, which are artefacts from about 13,000 years ago, and some that Arnold thinks are even older. Whatever is under the mountain has been here a long time. Most surprisingly, there were ancient Chinese, Arabic, Indian, Roman, Spanish, and other cultures' artefacts present as well, all of them from prior to the discovery of the New World. The findings in this site would change everything known about world history. Arnold reports, however, that his initial excitement was soon replaced with fear as the implications of the site dawned on him.
How could such a place be so important to so many cultures for so long?
The tunnels led to a series of chambers deep in the core of the mountain, where Arnold found
baskets of herbs and spices, pottery, weapons and armor, talismans, other religious items, countless other things, but all of it was there purposely, as offerings.
Footage cuts to an educational program about how the Earth's moon formed. This may seem like a minor and forgettable detail, but as I'll mention later, it has some significance to the story, I believe.
It was billions of years ago, when our planet was still mostly fire and rock, that a Mars-sized planet that had been drifting through our solar system collided directly with the Earth. The impact was so powerful and violent that the rogue planet was blown into countless pieces of debris. This debris collected to form our moon. Many of the pieces of the unknown planet remain inside the Earth to this day.
Something I thought would be worth mentioning is the show lined up at 10 PM. Night Hiking Episode 13, Mount Greylock. Assuming this occurred after the home invasion incident, it seems incredibly irresponsible to be encouraging people to go out in the woods at night. Next up, we have a police call from Liam Hollander, who you may remember as one of the producers from the meeting at the beginning of this tape. He reports a break-in at a co-worker's house, who is quickly revealed to be Don Wright. When asked if anybody is hurt, Liam goes quiet.
Can you tell me, is anybody hurt? Liam, are you still with me? Sorry. Is anybody hurt? Yes.
The footage then cuts to Don Wright, dead in his bed, with the same disfigurement as was shown in the broadcast hijacking. Footage cuts, and we are back with Arnold. He says that there were many altars in the chambers beneath Mount Greylock, and evidence of mass animal and human sacrifice.
There's something in that mountain. Something people of countless cultures over the history of our planet have been worshipping, but I don't know why.
Arnold says that there is something down there, and he felt compelled to go further and speak with it. And ever since he left, he's been feeling a strong droning in his head, causing him to not be able to sleep. Arnold recommended to Frank to discontinue construction so that the tunnels could be properly explored, but Frank refuses, however, allows Arnold to return with the team and gather historical artefacts from the tunnels. Arnold refuses, but Frank insists. Before this is resolved, footage cuts to an informational tape about the survivors of the GREYLOCK Morelli incident. It essentially just goes through all of the survivors from the crew in tape 6, and what kind of disfigurations and mental conditions they got from the infection. I won't go through all of them here, so if you want to see all of them, of course go and watch the original video, but I'll cover some of the interesting ones now. All you need to know about the early ones is that they just get increasingly more violent and disfigured as the tapes go on. Our first interesting one is Ramon Herrera, who is stuck comatose with this wonderful facial expression we see here. At random intervals, he will sit bolt upright and projectile vomit at anyone near him, and the vomit itself is extremely corrosive and emits nerve gas. Edward Kowalski is extremely violent and extremely disfigured, but above all else, has an extreme power of suggestion over others. This means that likely anyone he talks to, he can convince to either let him go, or to enter his chamber so he can consume them. John Rafferty is dead, looking almost mummified. Any humans who spend time in the corpse's presence quickly become ill with the infection, even through protective gear. We now cut back to Arnold Rivers for a final part of the video, and the series so far. Frank had quickly accepted Arnold's second refusal to return to the construction site, which Arnold found odd, and hung up immediately. Arnold says that he heard something happened at the construction site, and
then simultaneously, there are all of these things that have been happening around the mountain. The home invasions, the dead bodies that fell from the sky over Cheshire, the pregnancy phenomena, so many other unexplainable things.
The home invasions and pregnancy phenomena we know about, but dead bodies falling from the sky? That must be something we're going to see in a later tape. Arnold has been working with a local investigator to try and get to the bottom of it all. He feels like he's been being watched, like there's some sort of looming threat hanging over him that he can't quite describe. Arnold thinks the government has sent someone for him, as when he went shopping a few days earlier, his front door was unlocked, but he was sure he'd locked it when he left. He had checked the entire house afterwards and found nothing, but just as he is rationalising it all, we hear a door creak open. Arnold panicking, saying that it's his basement door.
Well, I'm glad that I put all of this into a recording. Perhaps that was what I needed to snap me out of this. Honestly, I feel much better just talking about it. This can't be. Oh my god, that's my basement door. No. Camcorder. Oh, where's the damn camcorder? Here it is.
We now see camcorder footage of Arnold hiding in his closet. He explains that he's hiding in here with his files, and if anyone finds this video and his files, to bring it to Jim Melgren of North Adams, the interviewee from the newspaper snippet at the end of tape 7, and evidently the investigator Arnold has been communicating with. Whatever was in his basement lurks around the house, its footsteps heavy and fast, replaying the sounds of what seems like people being killed. If you haven't seen the tapes before watching this video, at least go watch this bit. I cannot do it justice here. Go now. Seen it? Good. As you should now know, as you watched this bit yourself, if you listened to me before, this is our creature from tape 6. It replays the final moments of countless victims, a middle-aged man, a child, a police officer, before it finds Arnold and kills him too. The most cruel and heartbreaking victim's death plays last, a child bemused by the presence of the creature, not knowing how dangerous it was. Something I only noticed when editing here. Look how fucking big he is. Suppose this was an average sized closet. His head is this big. Banana for scale. And that is the end of GREYLOCK, as it was when this video was made. It's time for us to decipher what the hell we just watched. I'm going to start with the elephant in the room, what the hell that creature is. Before I can do that, I need you to believe me when I say that the devil, being spoken about in tape 2, is a direct parallel to the creature, as some of my evidence relies on that, so let me show you why I believe this. The creature is, as we can see in the Arnold River tapes, very influential on humans, as most civilizations seem to have found their way to it somehow, at some point in time. In tape 2, the pastor says,
"We are drawn to him by our own hearts,"
which is a clear parallel between the two. Furthermore, after entering the chambers below Mount GREYLOCK, Arnold felt compelled to go and speak to the creature.
But I could feel it. Whatever's down there, I could feel it. It was like being trapped in a fever dream. I swear I could hear a voice, and even felt compelled to go further, to speak to whatever's down there.
The pastor says in tape 2, Arnold has entered his chambers, seen his secrets, and although not yet truly met the creature, a bit of him is pulled to it. The more on-the-nose clue is near the beginning, when the pastor talks about the words of Charles Spurgeon, who said that
our adversary, the devil, goes about like a roaring lion,
and that
we are not to enter the thicket in search of the lion. We may pay dear.
The construction crew came across the tunnels, the thicket, and paid dearly for their mistakes. Arnold, who entered most deeply into the thicket, met his fate at the hands of the lion itself. I hope all of this has been enough to convince you at least of the parallels between the devil and the creature. My theory about the origins of the creature relies on one thing: the Cosmic Mysteries section actually being relevant to the plot. If we are to believe that nothing is placed in the series for no reason, then the Cosmic Mysteries section says to me that the origin of the creature is extraterrestrial.
Many of the pieces of the unknown planet remain inside the Earth to this day.
The creature came with this other planet and landed where Mount GREYLOCK is now. Now we're going to use the information we know about the devil to learn some more about the creature. It's my belief that the creature is the source of all thought forms. My greatest piece of evidence for this being when the pastor in tape 2 says,
And though you may tremble before the beast, you should make it easier on yourself and accept what it is that he bestows upon you.
What the creature bestows upon humanity is, I believe, the ability to create thought forms. Despite Unit 13 touting the possible benefits of thought forms, we have never once seen a thought form do any good in this series. The thought forms of Unit 13 are uncontainable. The thought form child and Tiffany disappeared and led to her death. Mourners unwittingly summoned thought forms of the deceased, causing fear and heartbreak. It seems to me as if they are more an instrument of suffering rather than for good. Furthermore, the pastor also says that
there is a shadow nested deep, deep within our hearts, within our minds, in a place most people don't even know exists within themselves.
Which parallels in tape 3 when it says that the thought forms from the thought form manifester come from
the deepest recesses of the human mind,
suggesting that thought forms come from the shadow planted into us by the creature. Just to recap what I've said before I kind of bulldoze it with my next point, I believe the creature is extraterrestrial and that it is the source of humanity's ability to create thought forms. It influenced cultures across millennia to worship and give sacrifice to it until the tunnel to its chambers collapsed and its influence waned. The question is, how did a creature so apparently powerful fall off a map so fast after the collapse? Well, I think that the creature itself is a thought form. I know it sounds stupid. I have evidence, don't worry. At the peak of its power, the creature seemed to have an almost global influence if cultures from all over the world came to worship it. But then the tunnels collapsed, and it was cut off from the world, so now very few people knew about it. The only explanation I can think of for how its power was so drastically reduced is that it was the people's knowing, and perhaps fear of it, that gave it power. A problem I had up until this point was explaining what the translucent entity in tape 6 was. Well, in tape 3, weak thought forms are described as ghostly in nature, appearing only briefly in apparitions, but quickly returning to a semi-physical form. When the creature was let out by the construction crew, it was likely at its weakest point, so if it was a thought form, it would be in this ghostly phase. When it had the strength, it would appear briefly, being what the crewmen saw in the woods, but it needed more power to take a fully physical form. So, my revised idea of what the creature is a sort of avatar of fear. Tape 3 confirmed that thought forms could manifest as representations of emotion, and I believe that this thought form is attached somehow to fear. It acts in ways to make the crewmen fear it, stalking them from a tree line, setting off their hunting cameras, spreading a disease which makes a lot of its victims paranoid and also violent, which further spreads panic and fear. I believe that the broadcast hijacking in tape 7 was either by the creature, a thought form produced by it, or by someone under its control, as it seemed to further stoke the panic caused by the home invasions. When just released from the tunnels, the creature was in the ghost stage of thought forms, being the translucent entity we saw in the camera. It made apparitions to scare the crew, and their mental distress grew its power. After the GREYLOCK Morelli incident, and the events in the nearby town, the distress caused allowed the creature to manifest more fully into the world, as we see it directly attack Arnold only a week after the GREYLOCK Morelli incident. That seems to be a pretty good summary of my theory about the creature at this point in the series. I would like to disclaim that I know no more than anyone else who has seen tapes 1 to 8, so if you think you have a better theory, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I think it's time to move on. The next question I want to try to answer is who the home invaders were in Tape 4. A lot of people I've seen say that they were thought forms escaped from Unit 13. However, Tape 4 was manufactured in 1993, and there's no dates on the tape itself, so we have no evidence at all that Unit 13 was even operating in 1987. I think the more likely answer is the simpler one. These home invaders are the infected crew from the construction site. My first piece of evidence from this is something I mentioned when summarising Tape 4, being that the home invader we see at the end is quite heavily dressed. Leather gloves and a thick coat bring images of workers, as well as the faces in the static being disfigured in a way not dissimilar from the infected in Tape 8. The police in the emergency broadcast said none of the invaders could be identified, which would make sense because of these disfigurements. Something I didn't realise until editing is in the static here, you can actually see the creature's face, in colour and looking very fleshy, which is where we've never seen it anywhere else in the series. Furthermore, we know from Arnold's interview that the home invasions happened right at the same time as the GREYLOCK Morelli incident. It's likely that the workers, finally driven crazy by the infection and the influence of the creature, ran right down the mountain and began the invasions. The only factor I can't reconcile is why one of them would be recording, but I think it's excusable because how else would we even see it happen? Lastly, as Paul's final message ends and he begins to succumb to the infection, he begins to make very animalistic noises. When the home intruder in Tape 4 kills the resident of the home he's intruding, he makes very animalistic, almost bear-like noises. The fact that both of them make animal noises, although distinct, draws a connection between them, in my opinion. If any of you have any different ideas, leave them in the comments. But anyways, let's move on to another question. If you cast your mind back to the beginning of the series, someone was breaking into a seemingly abandoned Simiodyne office's computer system and downloaded something off it. Presumably what they stole is some of the contents of the very tapes we are watching now. But who is this mysterious person? It's my opinion that we are viewing this series through the perspective of Jim Melgren, the private investigator we previously spoke about, and that these tapes are compilations of evidence about the case. My biggest piece of evidence is that Arnold Rivers says that if his recording and files were found, they should be sent to Jim Melgren, and what do you know? Here we are, we have that very recording. Also, Jim seems to be someone deeply entrenched in the case, knowing enough to be getting interviewed about the infection in the newspaper snippet from Tape 7. Anyways, on to the next question. The issue of Tiffany doesn't seem too deep to begin with. Her baby was a thought form. Seemingly due to the GREYLOCK Morelli incident, the thought form dissipates and leaves Tiffany with no baby, and this happens to a number of other women. But, if you pay close attention to some clues we get later, things stop being so close and shut. I suppose my question here is, what is going on with Tiffany? The issue I find is that during the events of Tape 5, Tiffany is 29, and it is 1987. We know this, the birth dates and ages all add up, the baby even disappears the day after the GREYLOCK Morelli incident. Seems cut and dry, but in Tape 7, we get a momentary cut to this newspaper clipping. Engaged couple, Alex Marsh, 28, and Tiffany Crisaldi, 26, sit together as they discuss the, quote, baffling loss of their unborn son. A whole 3 years before the GREYLOCK Morelli incident, the same woman lost her child in a baffling way, and the father is none other than Alex Marsh, recipient of Tape 3. I'd just like to take a quick note about the significance of Alex receiving Tape 3. Project Stargate in real life wasn't declassified until 1995, and considering the leaps and bounds being made in universe, there's no way it was declassified before that point in this timeline. That means Alex Marsh needs a good goddamn reason to be requesting those tapes, likely because he is part of the project. And if he is indeed part of the project, what does it say that his wife seemingly carried 2 form pregnancies, both of which disappeared? With the information I have, I can't really say what the significance of these facts put together is, but I would not be surprised if in future we found out that Tiffany is being used as some kind of test subject for Unit 13 in some way or another. In other words, I have no idea what's happening with Tiffany. I'm now going to just go through some questions I wrote down whilst watching for the first time, and then give my best answer with the evidence I have now, which could very possibly just be no answer. Who is recording Tape 2? We have very little information about this cameraman, but if I had to make an informed guess, of everybody in this series, the only person who would make sense is the private investigator, Jim Melgren, as the cameraman seems to be investigating the site of the murder, the details of which can be heard distorted over Tape 2. What is the significance of the tree in Tape 2? This is something I have very little clue about. There's obviously something sticking out with it, but what it is beyond me. I even asked some people I knew to give their best guess of what it was, and the only one that made sense to me was maybe a VHS tape. Even then, it seems too thin to be a tape, so it's possibly a murder weapon. I have no idea. One thing I do believe is that this tree is where the corpse was found, being described by the distorted voice. Who were the victims in tape 4? There is very little there to identify them. They're likely just random unfortunate souls from the GREYLOCK area. Who is Frank Porter? We have no more evidence now than we did when I wrote down this question. We know he's part of the army, and if I were to make an educated guess, I'd say he's probably part of Project Stargate, maybe even Unit 13. This is because I believe the construction crew's phone lines were limited on purpose, since they were still able to contact Frank, likely under orders from Frank himself. This is mostly speculation, to be honest, but suggests to me that the army had some kind of prior knowledge of the entity, or at least knew something was going to be there. Who opened the tunnel? An obvious answer would be the creature, but if it had been able to do that the whole time, then I don't buy that it would have waited until now to try it. Paul clearly has no idea who cleared it, but Arnold seemed to believe that Paul ordered it, which gives us two possibilities. Possibility 1 is that Arnold didn't see it happen and assumed it was Paul, in which case I believe it could have been Frank who ordered it from behind the scenes, if he did indeed have prior knowledge about the creature. Possibility 2 is that Frank saw Paul order it, meaning Paul was either lying, under the creature's influence, or most terrifying of all, the creature had created a mimic thought form of Paul for the purpose of tricking the workers into releasing itself. I like that idea of the last one the most, but I don't know whether the creature would be strong enough at that point to be pulling those kind of moves. That concludes the questions I asked, which hadn't already been answered elsewhere, and with that concludes what I had to say for this video. This has been a massive change from the kind of content I usually make, and was very fun to create, so I hope you enjoyed, and good luck sleeping after this one.